Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today on Psyched with Setmire. What we'll do super quickly is look at intelligence tests. I'll define them for you, but what we'll focus on are what are the characteristics of a good test. What are the things that make a test worth using and the information that it yields worth using as well. So that's what we'll focus on super briefly in this unit. So thanks for joining me and let's define some of these characteristics. So what are intelligence tests and what are the characteristics of a good test? What makes a test worth using? Psychologists define intelligence testing as a method for assessing an individual's mental aptitudes and then comparing them with others using some kind of numerical score. And there are quite a few properties that make a test worth using, but three of them that we'll focus on very briefly are standardization, reliability, and validity. If you don't have these three elements when using a test, the information that you get might be pretty worthless, right, in the end. So standardization, you want your test to be able to be compared with other people. Standardization means that we can define meaningful scores by comparing them with the performance of another standardized group. So think about any standardized test that you might have taken, like the SATs or the PSATs or the ACTs or GREs, any of those couple of letter horrible tests that we have to endure. But with those tests, they're standardized. They're given to each person in the same, if not very similar manner. The test questions have been deemed to be equivalent. Therefore, a score of 1200 on the SATs in California means the same thing as a score of 1200 on the SATs in Massachusetts. So we can make a direct comparison between those two numbers. We also want a test to be reliable. And another word for that is that it's consistent. You want a test to produce stable and dependable scores. The scores shouldn't be all over the place. They should be relatively consistent and relatively stable or dependable or reliable. And finally, we want a test to be valid or accurate. You want it to actually be testing what it's been designed to measure. And let me give you an example with a scale. I'm sure many of you own a scale. I own one and know better than to step on it. It's in my bathroom. But if you were to think about a scale, this is an assessment of your weight. So you want a scale to be standardized. You want 1 pound on your scale at home to be equal to 1 pound on the scale at the gym, or 1 pound on the scale at the doctor's office. That way your weight means the same thing everywhere you go. A pound is a pound is a pound. Your scale would be standardized. You also want it to be reliable or consistent. So if I stepped on the scale today and it said 200 pounds, I would hope that if I stepped on it tomorrow, it would be close to that number. It might be a little bit higher or a little bit lower, like 202 or 198, 201, 199, right? But I would expect it to be close. A small amount of error is okay, but if I stepped on it tomorrow and it's a 250, right, then it's not overly consistent. So the information that it's telling me is probably not all that useful. And finally, I want my scale to be valid or accurate. If I step on it and it says 200 pounds and I weigh 300 pounds, which I don't, but just as an example, then what it tells me isn't all that helpful. It's telling me a weight that isn't at all valid or accurate. So you want a scale to have these three things, just like you would want an intelligence test to have these three properties. And if it doesn't, then again, the information that it tells you is likely fairly useless or meaningless.